Have you ever heard of syllabus shock? It usually happens on the first day of class when the professor gives the syllabus. Students will sometimes get a pit in their stomach and they think something like, this is way too much stuff. I'm looking at you, Aaron. I'm never going to be able to do all this. The professor is crazy. Or maybe you felt similar emotions if you've ever had a newborn. All of a sudden, there's this tiny little life looking to you for everything. When the nurses swaddled Ruby, my oldest, they placed her in the bassinet, and then they walked out of the room, and I looked at Chelsea and I said, they're coming back, right? Or maybe you felt something like this after talking with a friend or a counselor about an issue in your life. You've worked up the courage to talk about something challenging. You've been vulnerable and open, and this person has really listened. You have a sense of hope. There seems to be a way forward, but then at some point, maybe as you're walking back to your car or before you go to bed, you get flooded with all sorts of negative thoughts and emotions. You begin to wonder if growth is truly possible. The hope felt so wonderful, but the journey to where you want to go feels daunting. I think we all know something of these feelings. We all know what it's like to see where we want to go and recognize that it will be a challenge to get there. And the psalmist in Psalm 121 knows something of this experience too. I lift my eyes to the hills, he says. The hills are the mountains of Jerusalem. The psalmist is setting out on a journey up the mountain, but the problem is that the mountains were not very safe. There were wild animals and probably thieves. The travelers would be exposed to the elements. For most people, it would take multiple days to get there, so they're going to have to sleep outside. Not to mention, they are making the climb on foot. There are so many challenges, and we haven't even mentioned the emotional or the spiritual aspect of it yet. This wasn't just a test of physical fitness. It was an emotional and spiritual journey of faith. Journeying up the mountain was saying yes with the whole of one's being, that I will keep moving forward in faith. So the psalmist must decide, will I climb or will the challenges be too much? Will I make the journey or will I stay at home? And if I set out, what will my experience be like? And what we will come to see is that the psalmist takes the challenge and he does so with confidence, and he wants us to do likewise. He wants to instill confidence in us to pursue the life the Lord is calling us to, the confidence to keep journeying forward in faith. So that's what we're going to spend the next few moments looking at. We will see this first by answering the question, where does my help come from? And second, by considering what kind of help we can expect from the Lord. When the psalmist looks to where he wants to go, he first pauses and asks, where does my help come from? And it can be easy. It can be easy to forget to ask that question. When we look at the challenges in front of us, we might be more inclined to ask the question, how am I going to do all this? When we see where we want to go, we usually do some kind of challenge analysis, right? Some of us might look at the challenges and feel immobilized. The fears and the difficulties might keep us from attempting the journey at all. Others of us might make the journey, but we're kind of consumed with the challenges. We journey, but we journey anxious and afraid, always on the lookout for what could go wrong next. And still others of us might make the journey with a sort of king of the hill mentality. You remember that game? You try to get to the top of the hill by any means necessary, and then you stay there by any means necessary. And that's really fun for youth group, but not so great for everyday life. But the psalmist says there is a better way. There's a different kind of analysis that we can do. And it doesn't start with, how am I going to do all this? But rather, where does my help come from? Our youth group was at the Bridge in Chicago the other night. And if you don't know, the Bridge is a church that seeks to bridge formerly incarcerated individuals to churches throughout the Chicagoland area. And they do an amazing job, and they've been doing this for like 20 years now. And one of the students and I were talking with one of the guys there, and he kept saying this. He kept saying, "I'm moving forward with the Lord's help." This man had been a very talented football player and a successful fitness trainer after college. But in his late 30s, he started using drugs, and he got into trouble with the law. And he's now living sober, and in his own words, he's trying to restart his life in his 50s. And when I try to encourage him, I try to say something like, "Good job," or "You're doing it," he would instantly respond with, "It's the Lord. It's the Lord. It's only because of him." He is making the journey by looking for a help that comes from outside of himself. How about you? Where do you go when you look at the challenges in front of you? Where do you turn when you feel overwhelmed? What do you tell yourself when the path to where you want to go looks scary? The man from the bridge and the psalmist are reminding us that the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, is your helper. You can look to God for help, to God, the almighty maker of heaven and earth, the one who predates the mountains, the one who is sovereign over all the elements of nature. He will be your helper. He will draw near to you and guide you and guard you and protect you and keep you. What the psalmist is doing is trying to give us a different way to see the journey. Instead of seeing the various obstacles as things that might prevent us from getting to where we want to go, he is teaching us to see them as the very places God shows up. The Lord will be your helper as you journey forward in faith. And the psalmist takes his own advice. He doesn't stay at home, nor will he journey up the mountain holding his breath, hoping he makes it in one piece. No, he will move forward, neither avoidant nor cavalier. He will move forward in confidence, and the confidence that comes from knowing that the Lord is his helper. He knows there will be difficulties and obstacles and stresses, but because the Lord is his helper, he has a mental map that says those things can become meaningful parts of my story rather than the end of my story. He considers the challenges as opportunities for God to show up. The challenges won't define his journey. What will define his journey is how the Lord helps him through those challenges. He sees the difficulties as the very places where Almighty God shows care for one little traveler. We are being reminded to pause and lift our eyes to see more than the challenges. Or even better, to pause and see the challenges as opportunities to rely on the Lord's help. And we are doing that very thing right now. We are right now reminding ourselves that our help comes from the Lord. And as we do that, we are then in a much better spot to think about how we can move forward in confidence. And that's where we will turn our attention to now. Since the Lord is our helper, what kind of help can we expect? And to answer this, the psalmist is going to think through the concrete circumstances of his journey. And more specifically, he's going to think through the various fears and challenges that he will likely encounter. He works through these fears with three things that everyone who looks to the Lord for help can expect. You can expect the Lord to guide you as you make decisions. You can expect him to protect you from forces outside of your control. And you can expect him to grow your confidence in him. First, you can expect the Lord to guide you as you make decisions. In verses 3 and 4, we are told that the Lord will not let your foot be moved, which is to say that the Lord will keep you securely on the path. The fear here is that you might step on something so destabilizing that you cannot complete the journey. And obviously that's important for people traveling up a mountain, right? If you step on a rock that's not as sturdy as it appeared, you might twist your ankle and not be able to continue on. And we totally get that. We've all wondered if we're making the right decision. We've all asked the question, is this the step I should take? And what we're asking is, will this choice be able to hold my weight? Will this destabilize my life, or will it help me to live the life I long for? Will this move me in a good direction? Should I choose this major or that major? Should I take this job or that job? Should I move here or there? And what you don't want to be doing in the decision-making process is worrying about every little step along the way. Years back during the Olympics, I was watching the marathon, and the commentators mentioned that they could tell a runner at the front of the pack was about to fall off the pace. They said they knew this because the runner's vision kept getting closer and closer to his feet. Apparently, the way to keep running strong is by keeping your head up. If you start focusing on each step, you're in trouble. But sometimes we do that when we make decisions. We think, if I could just predict every little detail, if I could forecast every potential problem, then I would have the certainty I need to move forward. But that is not a recipe for success. I think my mic has not had All right, is that better? Yep. Let's see if I can position this here. Sorry, everybody. Of course, we want to exercise wisdom, right? We want to seek good counsel when we're making decisions, but we all know the truth. We can't know how every little detail is going to shake out. So to the fear of making the wrong decision, the psalmist reminds us of the ever-vigilant watchfulness of God. He is always on the clock, so you don't have to. He never takes his eyes off of you, so you can keep your head up. The image here is of a drowsy sentry. We can think of the night guard who slowly nods off right when the bad guys are coming to ransack the castle. The psalmist says, yeah, God is nothing like that. He doesn't slumber. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't take a nap. He is your sleepless keeper. Which I think means that the weight of every decision is not entirely on you. God is looking out for you all the time. He knows you better than you know yourself, and he knows exactly where you need to go. You can be confident as you make decisions because it is his special prerogative to watch over your journey. He will get you to where he wants you to go because he never takes his eyes off of you. And second, you can expect God to protect you from things outside of your control. In verse 5 we read, the sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The fear here is that the forces of nature will alter or diminish your abilities. The sun and the moon are forces beyond us that can overpower us or exert influence upon us. And we might not think of the moon that way, but I think we can still understand the fear here in our technological world. We know of all sorts of things that are beyond us and yet can have a negative influence upon us. We have way too much knowledge of those kinds of things, actually. I think this is one of the reasons why so many people are dealing with anxiety in our day and age. Things feel up in the air and uncertain, but even more than that, we are reminded of it constantly. This person has this thing, I guess I should work more. This thing happened over there, I don't want to be uninformed. We are flooded with news and information and knowledge and perspectives and on, and it is just way too much stuff. We were not made to consume nonstop information. And we all know this is true, because if you've ever scrolled on your phone for like a little bit longer than you meant to, you know that you end up feeling lousy afterwards. Not just like I'm kind of upset with myself lousy, but like physically bad. Your mind is foggy. You don't feel confident. Oh, I can go out into the world and do something meaningful. You feel kind of miserable because consuming nonstop information is exhausting and it zaps your energy, kind of like the moon. This is one of the reasons why so many people So how do we move forward in confidence? We're told in verse 5, the Lord is your shade on your right hand. And obviously shade on a hot day is refreshing, but I think this is saying something a little bit more than that. Why is it that the Lord shades your right hand? Why is that the thing he is covering specifically? I think what's being said is that the Lord protects your strengths. Throughout Scripture, the right hand is a symbol of honor or strength. Sit at my right hand, the father says to the son. Jacob named his youngest son Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. His spirit was revived because this son was born to him in his old age. What we are being told is that the Lord protects our strengths so we can have meaningful agency. In the show Ted Lasso, there was a character named Nate. He was the kit man for a professional soccer team. And if you're wondering what a kit man is, just think equipment manager. Nate had very little self-confidence, and the players treated him terribly. But he loved soccer, and he was a hard worker. And one day, Ted, the coach, is struggling to come up with a good play, and Nate happens to be right outside, and he's taking out the trash. And Ted says, I'm officially on the prowl for some new ideas. And Nate kind of lifts his head, and his eyes widen a little bit. And Ted says, you got something, Nate? And Nate gets all freaked out. He's like, no, I don't have anything. But of course he does. And he tells Ted, and it ends up being a great play, and it's wonderful, and it works out great. And Ted starts giving him more and more opportunities. And eventually, Nate starts to realize that he matters, that he's got something to offer, that he could make a difference. And that's what's being said of you. God has placed something in your hand, and what he has placed in your hand, he shapes. You have something to offer. You have something to contribute. You can make a difference in the world. You can pursue growth. You can build towards a life of meaning and purpose because the Lord shapes your right hand. Don't allow the fears of things outside of your control to drown those things out. There will always be things outside of our control. The psalmist fully recognizes that too. But he also recognizes that God, who is truly in control, has given us good things for the journey. He wants us to use them as we continue forward in faith. You and I get to play a meaningful part in this journey. And third, you can expect that the Lord will grow your confidence in him. In verse 8 we read, the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. This is the psalmist's way of saying that the Lord will keep you in every area of your life, forever. The psalm now expands beyond one trip to Jerusalem. Your going out and your coming in means that in everything you do, the Lord will be your keeper. I think the fear here is that the Lord's keeping might be partial but not complete. That his keeping might only be good for a limited time or for a limited number of trips. But that is not how the Lord's keeping works. His keeping does not lessen over time. It deepens. You may know that Psalm 121 is part of the Psalms of Ascent, and it's widely believed that these psalms were sung by Israelites as they made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year. The Lord made journeys to Jerusalem a regular rhythm in the lives of his people. And these journeys were one of the ways the Lord was teaching his people that he would be their complete keeper. The Lord was growing confidence in his people gradually. Confidence in the Lord is not something you have or don't have. It's not like some inborn quality. Rather, it is something he grows you in. There was a book that came out about a decade ago that said frequent low-stakes testing is a really good way for students to learn. Instead of having some huge make-it-or-break-it final, they suggested to have little quizzes baked into the schedule for the entirety of the course. And what's kind of cool about this is I got to experience it firsthand. That book came out a year before I started undergrad, and my professor implemented that in our course. And I wasn't thrilled about it right away. But about by week 6 or 7, I started to think a little bit differently about the tests. I had this distinct memory when I realized that if I just do this week what I did last week, and the week before that, and the week before that, I'm probably going to be okay. And that's something like what the Lord was doing for his people. With each successful trip to Jerusalem, the Lord was growing them in an ever-accumulating trust that he is their keeper, that he is reliable and trustworthy, that his keeping does not diminish nor fade. They didn't have to have perfect confidence on day 1. The Lord didn't expect them to have a full grasp on how complete his keeping was from the beginning. Instead, each generation's journeys were meant to deepen and expand their understanding of all that God's keeping entailed. And what we see in Jesus is that this keeping is still continuing to deepen and expand. Jesus is the perfect traveler. He journeyed in complete and utter trust in his heavenly Father. He moved forward entrusting his every step to the will of God. He always used the good things that God placed in his hand for the good of others. He went up the hill that led not to Jerusalem, but rather to the cross. And he went forward confidently, knowing that the cross would not be the end of the story. And it wasn't the end. He rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, because the Lord's keeping is complete. It includes the physical and the spiritual, both body and soul, in life and in death. The Lord is your keeper. And I think we could say with confidence, Jesus is our keeper. Jesus is right now keeping us at the right hand of the Father. Our help comes from him. He is still deepening our understanding of how complete his keeping is. He is continuing to grow confidence in us as we move forward in faith. Now, as we do each week, let us turn to a time of confession. This is a chance for us to recognize in the past week ways where maybe we didn't look to the Lord for help, or maybe where we struggle to look to his help. So let us all turn to the Lord now.